All right. Well, we got off to a little bit of a bumpy start here on the first day of 2025, but welcome to the new year, and I'm hoping we have a good one. I really think maybe there's some reason for optimism. I know a lot of people look at Trump and the Trump administration with great trepidation, and I get that. I understand that. I do too. If you ask me why then did I not vote for the one candidate who had a legit chance to beat him, my answer would be because she weren't any better. I think the hope that we have is that maybe those who voted to keep the Democrats in power, recognizing that Harris Biden were very, very bad, but believing that Trump was even worse, will coalesce in a truly class-based economic justice movement. And that's my hope. That's what I'm trying to do here. That's what I'm trying to build at Halitics. That's why I do this. And I'm going to keep doing it for that very, very reason, because I don't think there's any other way we can win. I don't think there's any other way we can build a society where everyone has enough and no one has too much, where we can maintain a sustainable economy and protect and start to perhaps clean up some of the mess that humans have made in the environment. It's a long shot. It's not something that I think is very likely, but I don't know any other thing to do. So that's why I'm here. And, that's what makes this program, I think, ultimately different from every other lefty show on YouTube and that I'm aware of, is that we're consistently promoting a solution, and that solution is a politically based alternative to the Republicrats. Even my buds over Due Distance, and of course I don't know I'm their buddy, but I do like their program, the Due Distance Bros. A lot of times I like it anyway. They're contemptuous. They're openly contemptuous of the Green Party. They don't promote any other solution either. We've seen a lot of protest movements rise up, including climate defiance, true civil disobedience, which I love. But in the end, they've tied their wagon. They've hitched their wagon to the Democratic Party. So we're going in a different direction. We're saying, no, you gotta vote for alternatives. We've gotta unite for the Greens or anything right now but the Republicans. The situation, I always start my programs. I'm going to continue to. Anyone who's been following me, and by the way, again, join, I always say this, click like, click subscribe, and also call me, 240-242-5646. I see there were a couple of messages. I'm going to try to check those messages out, see if anyone had anything to say, because people may call when I'm not live. And if I'm not live, I ain't going to answer. I'm not going to even know you called. I only know you call when you call during the program. And again, that's 240-242-5646. Always get a little bit... first program back, maybe there's going to be a few little glitch moments, so hopefully they don't interfere too terribly. I think the proof that we have to go in a different direction continues to be, if nothing else, the support that the current administration has provided for the Israeli genocide. And obviously, the new administration promises more of the same and even perhaps worse. I mentioned that when I'm walking around my neighborhood, and I'm grateful for all the good things I have, for how fortunate I am. I thought, and I often do, of people who don't have nearly as much as I do and who are struggling, who are maybe insecure, housing insecure, maybe food insecure. I don't know any place where things are worse right now than in Gaza. And in the winter, it's obviously an even more terrifying circumstance for the folks living in tent cities. Can't even build a fire for fear that it could attract Israeli bombs. So you see this from yesterday's New York Times. Several people were killed in Israeli airstrike in Jabalia, where the survivors of the Holocaust to date are enduring harsh conditions. I read in today's paper, I don't have the actual clip, today's New York Times, that I believe was the Times, maybe it was somewhere else, 8 dead now of hypothermia in the new year in Gaza because they don't have fuel, they don't have shelter except maybe a tarp over their heads. And that's just not enough, including children. That's what we're supporting. That's what Biden-Harris support. That's what Trump claims is coddling the Palestinian people. So we'll almost certainly get more and worse as the year progresses. I don't know of any better reason to support alternatives, emerging parties. And again, that is what we do here. That is what Halitics is all about, is coming up with a better way, a different way, something that could lead to a better outcome. You can see there, subscribe, please, if you haven't done so yet. Subscribe to Halitics. And by the way, Ari, Happy New Year to you. Happy New Year to all. And I'm hopeful, maybe things will really and truly improve. You can see also I've got your little thumb there, so like as well as subscribe. If you've already subscribed, you can like. And if you've liked but you haven't subscribed, then that's even more what we would ask, because those subscriptions make all the difference. You want to see some moppets here. These are Palestinian children among the wreckage. No child should ever have to endure these conditions. And that sort of sounds like a cliche, right? A platitude. Oh, well, of course, no one should ever, suffer. But this is beyond the pale. This isn't just, the normal, okay, well, into every life some rain must fall. This is a planned and fully supported atrocity by the U.S., by the Israeli military, with the full support of the United States government. So there's some Gaza children yesterday, just in the wreckage. The show isn't only about Israel, isn't only about the crimes of Israel and its victims, or the United States victims, the empire victims. We talk a lot about healthcare, the environment, and we'll get to healthcare later on in this program. But I do open, if you're not familiar with Halitics, if you're new to this program, I open with a discussion of the latest terrible news in Gaza. Yesterday, I believe we have a death count of 28 people killed in the last 24 hours. So that would be as of Wednesday, January 1. Israel taking no break from its attacks. And there you see 28 more killed in the past 24 hours. Tomorrow's going to be a bad day, I'll tell you right now, for the free-for-all, which is what we do on Friday. There have already been a number of attacks on defenseless civilians in Gaza today by Israel. So you'll see when I go live, they'll have a much, even, more deaths, and probably a particularly deadly day in Gaza. So be aware, be mindful of that. Overall death toll now, 45,581. Those are confirmed, and we always caveat that the true count is going to be far higher. It's just, because some bodies haven't been identified, some bodies haven't been found, they're just buried in the rubble. Some people may be missing, but have not yet been determined to be dead. The past week, the week after Christmas, 243 victims killed by Israel, with the full support of the Biden-Harris administration. We'll change that to Trump when it's time, but for now, the killing in Gaza, the blood, is in the hands of the Harris-Biden administration. The goal here again is to provide a rallying point, but also an honest spot, a place where we can discuss, where we can have a back and forth about the issues that we're facing as well as the solutions to them. I think it's critically important that we have such a square, town square if you want, because our traditional media, our mainstream media, corporate media isn't serving that role. And in fact, I don't even think you can find much alternative written, words as opposed to spoken words, but written words in anywhere that talk about what we're discussing. I mean, again, I looked back and in 2016, there was like maybe one alternative daily in the entire country or one alternative newspaper that endorsed Bernie Sanders over Hillary Clinton, even though it was obvious he was a much, much better choice. And even if you say, well, it wasn't obvious to me, Al, I thought Hillary was a really good choice. Even if you take that position, you have to acknowledge Bernie got north of 40% of the Democratic primary votes. In a country where the newspapers are by and large significantly, by a significant majority, Democratic leaning, how could you possibly argue that the media is fairly representative of the populace if there's only one alternative print media that endorsed the guy who got over 40%, right? I mean, you'd think it would be maybe 4 out of 10, 3 out of 10, 2 out of 10, 1 out of 10, 1 out of 50, 1 out of 100. No, it was like 1 out of a few thousand, maybe. I think that was the Seattle Times or something that endorsed Bernie in the primaries. That was it. Quite extraordinary, really. You don't get a progressive view in the media. And even endorsing Bernie really wouldn't have been that extreme by any means. I mean, this was a guy who was running as a Democrat, one of the two corporate parties he was running in. So there isn't print media, whether it's virtual print or hard paper print, that's progressive in this nation. It just isn't there. There are some relatively progressive podcasters, live streamers like myself. We have very small, in general, smaller numbers of viewers. But YouTube does tend to have a little bit more variation. Very few, the Substack and all them. I haven't found very many who are full-throated green supporters. So that's why we do this. So we can have that place for people who recognize that the two parties are the problem. They spearhead the problem. They represent the billionaire class. This is a good example of what I'm talking about from the New York Times. A lot of people, the New York Times is great. They're the only reason I can get up in the morning is to read the New York Times. Well, they're not giving you anywhere near the full story. This is the New York Times trying to be, I guess, bipartisan maybe, although Swozzi's a Democrat. But, they're putting this more corporate, I guess, conservative Tom Swozzi, who's been more critical of the Democratic elite, Democratic leadership than many, but he's been critical from the right. So that's what you get. You don't get an aggressive review of Democratic parties from a leftist perspective. You don't get that in the New York Times. Here's what Tom Swozzi has to say. The wake-up call America needs. That's what he's calling the Trump election. I hope progressives view this as a wake-up call, as a recognition. I hope it generates recognition that we cannot continue down this path, this two-party path. We need an alternative. We need to build a movement that takes on both parties. That's not what Tom Swozzi is going to say. Tom Swozzi, I think, wants the Democrats to become more like the Republicans, So his assessment is that it was a mandate for border security, immigration reform, low inflation, economic stability. So, I mean, those are platitudes by and large, common ground on cultural war fight. But let me take low inflation. Low inflation was a factor. Inflation was a factor because it means the implications of higher prices during the Biden administration, the implication of it was lower real wages for working people. Working Americans saw their paychecks going less far. They were going shorter and shorter. They were covering less and less over the Biden years. And that's why inflation was such a big problem. If you had seen wages rising at a faster clip than prices, which does happen on occasion. For example, during World War II, we had significant inflation, but workers were getting even faster increases in their wages. And the Roosevelt administration, the Democrats, were popular because real wages, because the actual cost of living was dropping relative to wages. So the real problem isn't just that prices were rising, it's that workers were not benefiting from those price hikes. The billionaire class benefited from those price hikes. They captured all, or not virtually all, more than all of the profits because the wages dropped versus what they were paying workers dropped versus the increase in the prices that they were able to charge. But Swazi doesn't want to talk about workers. He doesn't want to talk about wages because he is, in fact, he's supported by the billionaire elites. He doesn't want to piss them off or to say we need to pay workers more. He as far as he goes, is economic stability. Border security, immigration reform are problems for a couple reasons. One, the crime issue is real, but it's overstated by demagogues. Immigrants tend not to be particularly criminal, but you do have some, obviously, crimes committed by poor people coming into this country who can barely, who need to survive, who want to survive. So you'll see some increase in crime as a result of relatively porous borders. But the bigger problem, again, is wages. When you increase labor, you reduce wages. An increase of anything leads to a drop in the price it can command, that it can sell for. So labor sells for wages. And with more immigrants, whether legal or not, whether documented or not, prices are going to have downward pressure. Wages are going to be subject to downward pressure. So again, the factors that Swazi identifies are somewhat, he touches on them, but he doesn't directly address what Democrats need to do, which is promote better wages, higher wages versus prices and jobs. He doesn't talk about that because that's not the true Democratic agenda. Democratic agenda is simply to position themselves as apparently better for workers, not to actually promote policies that will make life better for workers. And you see that. You don't see one word from Swazi in this op-ed calling for the policies that would make life better for working people. There's not one word about Medicare for all. There's not one word, but the wars that we're fighting are incredibly harmful to working people. They increase the budget deficit. They lead, therefore, that which also, by the way, causes higher prices. Some of them are at risk. of being killed. The world is a more dangerous place because of our promotion of the proxy war against Russia. The world is a more dangerous place because of our support for genocide. We're hated. And we have less money, less resources available to address the problems that poor, struggling, and working people are facing. So if you had a party, or if you had a Democrat who was committed to improving the quality of life for poor, struggling, and working people, then they would be talking about these very issues. But they're not mentioned. Because, let's face it, most Democrats just don't give a crap. Even those like AOC and Bernie, who is actually, an independent. But let's just stick with AOC and some of the squad members. They may be, I believe, somewhat concerned about working people, but they're not going to take on their party. And the only way to improve the quality of life for poor, struggling, and working Americans is to reject both parties. Where does Swozy go? Where does the New York Times choice for this op-ed go? To reject the party's significant leftward shift. Now, he doesn't identify what that means, but it's generally a criticism of, I guess, identity politics, wokeism. And I agree with that, yeah, as far as it goes. We shouldn't elevate the challenges facing one particular group over those of members of other groups who are also facing significant challenges. I agree with that. It causes great resentment. And understandably so. But, I mean, just because Democrats say we should oppose Tennessee's law to make it harder or to make it impossible for there to be trans care for youth, right? That's the law in Tennessee. You can't have gender-affirming care in Tennessee if you're a minor. It's not going to be legal, I guess, at least with respect to any kind of beta blockers or anything like that keep kids from having their periods if they're girls, or from reaching adolescence if they're boys. That's the law in Tennessee now, and a lot of Democrats were criticizing it. And sure, that standing out in front of the Tennessee court, Tennessee state legislature, and complaining about it and attacking them is going to irritate people. But the bigger issue is not that Democrats are championing some identity groups that may not be popular. Bigger issue is they don't champion workers. They don't fight for struggling, poor, and working people. And that's why we need to go in a different direction. Because they're never going to. Because they won't. It's just that simple. That's why I do this program. All right, 240-242-5646. 240-242-5646. Yeah. So I did write a little response that I posted there on the New York Times, and it got some recommendations more than sometimes they won't even put what I write up there, but my goal is to be a little less, I guess, harshly critical sometimes in these little posts. So here was what I wrote, because that's what Swazi's big complaint is. The problem is the Democrats' leftward shift. So Democrat Party's leftward shift, laugh out loud, paying lip service to identity issues in order to keep the working class divided up. That's the function. And at the same time, perpetuating genocide, endless war, increasing production of fossil fuels, and ensconcing for-profit health care's tentacles ever tighter. That's not what I'd call a leftward shift. And I think most people wouldn't. And that's why the Democratic Party is struggling. Because they're not on your side. They're not on the side of working people. It's very, very unfortunate. We've got to recognize that. We can't pretend there's something different going on that is just the truth. And the way we deal with it is acknowledge it, accept it, and try to change things. This party is tied to the billionaire class, Democratic Party. This party is tied to endless war. This party is tied to genocide. This party is tied to for-profit healthcare. Gotta move in a different direction in 2025. There's a guy who does a pretty good podcast. I like him. I don't always love him, but I think he's pretty darn good. He's better than most. I haven't talked much about him, maybe never. His name is Jamal Charles. And I first learned of Mr. Charles when years ago when I was just sort of following Jimmy Dore. And Charles was a fan of Dore's and defended him from unfair criticism. And now here he is with a guest who also was first on Jimmy Dore's program. By the way, I have unsubscribed. I did a program called Canceled about Jimmy Dore because he's become a denier of the climate holocaust. And I think it's very unfortunate that that happened. But we should not ignore the fact that Jimmy has done some really good work on YouTube. This book is by Caleb Mopan. He was first featured, to my knowledge, on Dore's program. And his latest book, The Killing of Brian Thompson, he's the UHC, United Healthcare CEO. And I thought he had some interesting, provocative, and in some cases just simply incorrect statements. So I'm going to play part of it for you. Let's see if we can get this on. Remember, 240-242-5646 if you want to join me. And I wasn't sure if that was ringing. There we go. So it is ringing now. I don't know if you heard that. You may or may not have. Let's get the video going for you. Here we go.
Well, the book is about the murder of the CEO of United Healthcare. And the way it is being celebrated, and I am warning of the danger of something akin to the years of lead in Italy. From the 1960s to the 1980s, Italy experienced a huge amount of political violence with fascists and communists killing each other in the streets. And we now know that it was because Italy was poised to leave NATO. The Communist Party was very popular, and if they had joined the government, Italy would have withdrawn from NATO. And so the CIA launched something called Operation Gladio. And Operation Gladio involved fomenting all kinds of political violence and ultimately keeping Italy in NATO. The population became weary of the violence. People got out of politics because they didn't want to get killed.
I'm going to stop there for a second. So that was really interesting to me, Operation Gladio. I looked it up. I believe Mopan correctly describes it. By the way, I said Jamal Charles. I'm very sorry. Jamal Thomas is the host name, as you can see right there, Jamal Thomas. And I think he does a really nice job, again, in highlighting this author, Caleb Mopan. And so Operation Gladio was this idea that we've got to prevent Italy from leaving NATO. We've got to prevent the Communist Party from having real powerful influence over Italy's foreign affairs. And apparently it was successful, but it was successful because Italy did not leave NATO. But what Mopan is also describing is a situation where the CIA hired thugs and right-wing provocateurs to engage in street battles, targeted killings, and the like to cause chaos and to terrorize the left. He's analogizing that to what happened with Brian Thompson, that this is somehow, although from what we can tell, as best we can tell, we have no reason to think, let me put it a different way, the killing of Brian Thompson was presumably by a progressive, somebody who is completely, like so many of us, sickened by, nauseated by, disgusted by for-profit healthcare and the tens of thousands of Americans who die every year as a result, and the hundreds of thousands of Americans who go bankrupt every year as a result of for-profit healthcare, and the enormous costs to our society in terms of just inefficiency and expense for a immoral system to continue. So he's saying that kind of action, that kind of violence serves the right wing, even if in this case it was actually done by a lefty. And many progressives seem to be, at least expressing full understanding of why it happened. Mopan is saying, no, it's still ultimately the function of that violence, of that killing, serves right-wing or corporatist ends. He may be right. Let's play a little more of this.
And it ultimately resulted in Italy, to this day, being a member of NATO. Now, I argue that with Donald Trump poised to take a second term, and with the fact that the U.S. public is highly polarized, that there's a similar kind of psyop going on. Because you'll notice many of the voices who denounced Jimmy Dore at the top of their lungs and said, how dare he say force the vote, are celebrating killing somebody on the streets of New York City. And I don't know.
I want to just take a little issue with that. I just listened to that. I didn't know what he was talking about. He's saying that there certainly was a lot of criticism of force the vote in 2021, the very beginning of 21, when the House became Democratic and when Joe Biden took office. The plan that the proposal that Jimmy floated was AOC and the progressives, the squad, should withhold support for Nancy Pelosi to resume as Speaker unless she agreed to have a vote on Medicare for all in the House. And that would be the force of the vote, force the vote. And he's right. There were an awful lot of people on the left, people like Sam Cedar and Cenk and all those, that whole motley crew were critical of Jimmy. Now, they might have said, oh, well, it seems like it might be a good idea, but if it's too divisive, David Sirota was totally against it, as I recall, or he said, this isn't the right thing to force. We should force this. We should force that. But none of them were willing to just jump on board what Jimmy was calling for, which was, by the way, the best thing to force, because Medicare for all is very popular and it would have a tremendous benefit for the American public. It's especially popular among Democrats. And it would have led to a much better outcome for the American people. So Jimmy was 100% right. And Mopan is correct that there were many on the left who were condemning it, criticizing Jimmy, saying you're eating your own, you're going after progressives, you shouldn't be doing that. But where he's wrong is saying that all these people are also celebrating the death of the CEO. They're not doing that. I'm not hearing that. I'm not hearing even justifications exactly from those on the left who were critical of Jimmy for calling for force the vote. Instead, they're saying, well, we can understand why. We get it. Maybe we should have some regulations on healthcare. But I'm not hearing too many people championing the assassin, saying it's a good thing. And those who are, Breonna Joy Gray and Glenn Greenwald among them, the ones I can identify, and the due distance bros, they're not even celebrating. They're just saying, yeah, we get it. We understand why. They're the ones who supported force the vote. They were totally in favor of force the vote. So Mopan is getting that wrong a little bit.
Understand how that works. If a parliamentary procedure is some kind of, real violence against AOC and just unacceptable, why is it okay to shoot somebody on the streets of New York City? I don't get that. I'm not going to defend Brian Thompson. I mean, obviously, the guy made his career denying people health care, made billions of dollars doing it. I'm not going to defend that. But acts of senseless violence are not going to solve it. We need a real mass movement of people.
All right, so that's the money quote. We need a real mass movement. That's the only way we're going to get Medicare for all, because these multimillionaire CEOs and the billionaires who start the companies, they just go live in their guarded communities. They come out of their, down their winding estate, roads, driveways in in tinted window limousines. Everything's gated. They've got their private forces patrolling their properties. This guy, Brian Thompson, was, accessible, but that's rare. And if there's more violence against CEOs, in fact, even if there isn't, we're almost certainly going to see an uptick in security that they'll take for themselves. So he's right. This isn't going to change the dynamic. And he's also right that we need a mass movement.
People getting together and making real demands. The problem is not, quote unquote, bad people like Brian Thompson. The problem is the system. And it's going to require.
And I agree with that, too, because people are good, bad, and indifferent. This system rewards bad people, rewards people who are willing to do the worst things they can to their fellow human beings. So Mopan is right about all of this.
It requires systemic change, and isolated acts of vengeance are not the solution. And this is what.
All right, so he's right, but where he doesn't come up with the solution, he says we need a mass movement, but in favor of what? In support of what? Who? Who do we back? What Thomas says later on in this program is, in pushing back, he says, okay, you're right. People who, like Luigi, they're rebelling against an unfair system, an unjust system, and we can understand why. And you're right, it probably isn't going to make a difference. But what will? And that's where I am. We've got to figure out how to, build that progressive movement. I'm going to be in Annapolis this Saturday to help support my friend Andy Ellis. He's running for governor of Maryland, and I think is it a long shot? Yeah. Is he going to be able to take down the Democrat? I hope so, but I think it's going to be a real challenge. But I think we got to start. We got to start fighting. We got to do what we can. Because the Democratic Party is not your friend, is not your ally. The Democratic Party is the friend and ally of the billionaire class only. And this is the only, and therefore the only thing that we can do is take them down. Let me just get to that because there's an interesting article in Politico I want to talk about, but we'll get to that in a little bit. I do want to just focus for a moment on why I think we need in Maryland to go in a different direction from even the Democrats here. So this is from the group, let's see, who was it? Maryland Peace Action Maryland. Put this video up. And remember, Maryland is a trifecta state. We have all three branches firmly connected, firmly in the hands of Democrats, including and especially the most populous county, Montgomery County. I believe every single county council member is a Democrat. So what are they doing with all that power? How are they addressing the greatest crisis we're facing in the world, the Israeli genocide? How are they dealing with that? These Democrats, the ones that we were told over and over you have to vote for. Maybe Harris isn't that great, but you got to vote for the lesser of two evils because she'll do something. And it's maybe if you just elect her, she'll do something. Well, Maryland Democrats have done something. Let's listen to this.
In March, Peace Action Montgomery initiated a campaign to end our county's annual grant to the Maryland Israel Development Center. Our efforts were mostly ignored, and our elected officials still gave MIDC the grant. However, one county council member responded to our campaign, but it was to justify the grant. This video addresses those justifications.
Justification 1. The focus of Montgomery County's support for MIDC is strictly on civilian business development.
Ironically, the council member who wrote the email actually attended the groundbreaking celebration for RADA Technologies, which builds tactical radars for war.
The MIDC also brought RoboTeam to Montgomery County, which makes military drones. Like other Israeli weapons manufacturers, RoboTeam boasts that their products are battle-tested.
The MIDC also was the entity that brought ELTA and Rafa.
right, so let me stop it for a second. So what this video, because it's kind of a little bit, I guess, I don't know, hard to follow or hard to understand them. They're going after the Maryland Israel, and let's see, what is the development center? So this is a public-private public-private partnership where the state of Maryland and counties in Maryland have contributed tax money to build a development center to promote Israeli businesses. And the Israeli businesses also contribute. And it's gotten a lot of criticism. A lot of people are saying, well, this is just wrong. We shouldn't be supporting Israel. Israel's committing genocide. Why are we backing this? Why is Maryland, and specifically in the case of my county, Montgomery County, why is Montgomery County taxpayer money going to fund a development center that promotes Israeli businesses? And it's a great question, right? I mean, it doesn't seem like a proper function whatsoever of government. This is promoting foreign businesses. Yes, they're doing some business in this county, but these are companies that, again, are defense contractors that are behind and profiting from the Israeli genocide. And I'll just go back and play a little more, but bottom line is I don't know what to say. I mean, it's just these are companies that are profiting from the killing of Palestinians and stealing their land. And Maryland is promoting them. Maryland is a trifecta state. Both houses of the legislature and the governor are Democrats. The county executive in my county, Mark Eldridge, is one of the most progressive Democrats I've ever experienced, I've ever known of. And yet he supports this. So yeah, I'm going to be in Annapolis next week on Wednesday. I'll be taking a little time off. Let me just jump a little bit ahead. These are companies, again, these are military contractors. And so there's no excuse. What do they say? Battle tested, that they're bragging about how they use their weapons to kill Palestinians. And Maryland, Montgomery, my county, my taxpayer money is being used to promote these businesses.
And Raphael into Maryland. Both are more than just Israeli military manufacturing firms. They are actually part of the Israeli military itself.
Justification 2. The funding helped to exemplify our commitment to fostering socially responsible businesses.
This is Yossi Applebaum. He was an Israel intelligence officer and now runs a company called CPO. The MIDC has showcased Yossi as one of their success stories. This is also Yossi Applebaum.
Go away! Go away! Go back to where you came from! Brooklyn is my town! Fuck off! Fuck off! Because we'll take your head! We'll take your...
So yeah, this thug is somebody who is doing business in Montgomery County, Maryland, and whose business is apparently helping support this center along with our taxpayer money. This racist, this genocider. The response from the county, well, they're, paying taxes in our county and they're employing a few people here, so we're actually getting more back than we're putting in. I don't accept that. That's why you have to support alternatives. That's why we need to elect people who are completely separate from this corrupt party, this corrupt political party that focuses on fundraising and revenue above all else. And by the way, that's exactly the same as these so-called progressive organizations, many of them, the Our Revolutions, the Progressive Democrats of America, for that matter, the Sierra Clubs. they'll overlook just about anything if their corporate sponsors and backers or big, well-heeled donors are for it. So I'm going to be in Annapolis on January 4th this weekend to support Andy Ellis, who's taking on the current governor, Wes Moore. We can't stand for that. The Democratic Party is corrupt. It is an appendage, as we see, of the military-industrial complex. If we want a future, we've got to fight it. We're also going to have on folks from Peace Action Maryland and Peace Action Montgomery over the next few weeks as well. Again, if you want to join me today, 240-242-5646, 240-242-5646. Wanted to showcase this article in Politico because I think it again highlights, and what I was just saying is it's not just the Democratic Party, it's even so-called progressive institutions, progressive groups that are supposed to push the party to the left, but they see themselves ultimately as sheepdogs for the Democratic Party. Politico, I don't love the way they framed this article, but it was still a good article. It was still worth doing. So here's from yesterday. Pro-Palestinian activists lambasted Biden and Harris. Trump will be an even bigger dilemma. I kind of don't know how you could be much bigger dilemma. You know, the Democratic Party was going after pro-Palestine protesters too. You had people like Hillary Clinton who were just demonizing them. There's not a lot. It's more of a difference in kind, if anything. And what I'm hoping for is maybe there'll be a little bit more of a recognition when it's Trump and his administration that's cracking down on Palestinian voices, that this is anti-democratic, that this is wrong. That's my hope, because obviously the fact that it was Harris Biden that was dismissive of the very, very legitimate concerns of the Palestinian movement muted any protests from the left. People were terrified. Oh no, we'll help elect Trump if we criticize Harris Biden. As though, what's the point of electing Harris Biden if they're going to be supporting genocide? That's what I don't understand. So according to Politico, and I think this is probably fair, I guess their point is well taken, the latest challenge could be an even tougher one, maybe, than Harris Biden, as I just said. But their big concern is, Harris Biden were viewed as, I guess, slightly, what do they say? They were softer. They were more persuadable to soften support for Israel. But we didn't see any of that softening, did we? They might have been more persuadable, but they weren't persuaded. So how? How were they more persuadable? That the article does not address that. Nevertheless, despite the fact that there's no evidence that the party or its leaders would have been persuaded to stop funding the Israeli genocide in Gaza, or the president and his vice president could be called on to stop the genocide in Gaza, there's still this sense among at least the Democratic progressive activists, that you still should have just held your nose and voted for Harris Biden. Which is very ironic, or Harris Walls. It's ironic because since we've seen, I could Not that I ever agreed with it, but I could see that argument being lodged with some justice on November 1st. At least you could make it with, it passes the giggle test, right? To say on November 1st, yeah, Harris has been awful. Harris pledges more of the same. Harris pledges she's going to support Israel with unwaveringly, unconditionally. It's true. But maybe she's doing that because she's afraid of AIPAC. She has sort of paid some. She didn't meet Bibi, right? She refused to meet with Bibi. So if you really care about Palestine, then you have to vote for her, even though she isn't very good. That would be the argument on November 1. But we've seen now November, December, we're into January, and Harris Biden have tripled down on their support for Israel. When they have an opportunity to distance themselves, separate themselves from Israel without any political cost, they don't do it. They do just the opposite. And yet, Jim Zogby, who is, I believe, still, he certainly was always for many years on the board of Our Revolution, is saying self-criticism is due in the pro-Palestinian movement because they box themselves into a corner following the convention by not enabling themselves to support Harris. Why would they support Harris? It's absurd. Why would you support someone who is full-blown behind the Israeli genocide? Who was in the room by her own statements when the decisions were made to keep shipping the bombs and the missiles and the bullets to Israel. How dare they support Harris? And yet Jim Zogby, who is, I believe, a Lebanese American, whose country was decimated by Israel, thousands and thousands of Lebanese just killed when Israel launched an orgy of violence against Lebanon, completely destabilized Syria. Now, Syria was, taken over by rebels. Now, that may ultimately redound to the benefit of Syria. We'll see. I'm doubtful that that's going to, in the short run anyway, lead to any good results. And even if it does, there were, in my view, much better ways to address the cruelty of the Assad regime than to completely destroy Syria, which is what Israel did with our support. And yet Jim Zogby is saying, oh, well, despite all of that, we should have still supported. The Palestinians should still have supported Harris. And they, in fact, did. They did. They said, we can't endorse her, but we still want you to register anti-Trump votes. So they still went too far in support of Harris, that movement. But that wasn't good enough for Zogby, who is, as I mentioned, an Our Revolution trustee. So obviously, board member, these groups cannot be trusted to fight for poor, struggling, working people, to demand something better, to demand an end to the violence, to demand an end to genocide. They cannot be trusted to do that. In the end, they're going to come back and support the Democratic Party, which is not on our side. We need a mass movement, as you heard Kayla Mopan say. And that mass movement cannot back Democrats. So were there regrets? Did the Palestinian American movement, the uncommitted movement, the abandoned Harris movement to a degree, what are their regrets? And I'm really, really glad that the leader, Elabed, said, yeah, I regret that Harris and the Harris campaign and the leaders of the Democrats didn't listen to us. Well, she's absolutely right. So I'm glad they put that in there. That was a good quote. She nailed it. That's why the Democrats lost. She even says it. She's flat out. She didn't necessarily, she could have possibly won, is what Elabed continues to say. She didn't lose just because of uncommitted. Right. She had awful policies across the board. But maybe if she had, and even Chris Van Hollen made that point. When I talked to him about this, he said, yeah, she certainly turned off a lot of young voters. If you're angry at the fact, if you're angry that Harris lost and you want to blame someone, blame her. Don't blame uncommitted. Don't blame progressives. Don't blame me. Blame the party for making it impossible to support them. All right, 240-242-5646, 240-242-5646. I actually have a little blurb here from a Green, but I'm not going to go with it right now. Let's do this. This is sort of, I won't call it a feel-good story, and I could have done it tomorrow, but maybe we'll talk about the Green tomorrow. But this is an interesting story. I thought this, I don't remember if I ever discussed these blue zones, but I was very intrigued by a story that came out some time ago saying that Sardinians lived long lives, that there was longevity there, and there were several reasons. It was attributed to their diet, very low in animal fat. They eat a lot of fish. They eat dry cheeses, sheep, goat cheeses, as opposed to cattle cheese or cow cheese, which is less fattening. Their primary oil is olive, not butter. So for those reasons, and there were some others too, the lifestyle, the seniors are, live at home with their families, and they're expected to continue to work, to be in the garden, to watch the children. So they're not ever, farmed out to senior homes or any place like that. That those were all reasons that Sardinians live long lives. So this researcher decided to examine that theory, the thesis underlying it, that there are these places on Earth, including Sardinia, places in Greece, Japan, Costa Rica, where people live much longer than elsewhere. And according to this researcher, and it looks like he's absolutely right, it's not true. The blue zones generally tend to be poorer places, which is where you would expect people to actually live shorter lives. And the reason that's relevant is because they tend not to have as good record keeping. That the folks who are supposedly in their hundreds may well be dead, and that they just haven't been reported dead to the authorities because their families are collecting pensions and Social Security for them. And if they said, hey, grandpa died 3 years ago, then they're not going to get any more Social Security or pension money, and they might even have to pay some back. So they just keep, they don't say anything. They just keep getting the checks. So that's one reason. Poor record keeping, and just dishonesty. Two big reasons for the fallacy of the blue zones. And another that's reported is that some reporters, some journalists looking for a good story exaggerate. The Costa Rica blue zone apparently was just a fabrication by a New York Times reporter who was told when he came into the newsroom with a story about the Sardinians, well, find one in the Western Hemisphere. So he thought, okay, well, let's just say Costa Rica. So apparently the blue zones are largely a myth. May not be completely a myth. One researcher says, well, we may have some legit evidence that people in some of these places, because they do eat healthy diets, they're not obese, because they're not as wealthy. Maybe if they're cleaner environments, there's various factors. So it may not be a complete myth, but it's greatly exaggerated. I thought that was really interesting. And the takeaway I really liked from this article was the things you can do. Don't buy anything. I was trying to think, how is not buying anything going to make you live longer? How does that help you live longer, not buying anything, just not being part of, dropping out of consumerist culture. You have to buy something. So I was a little bit confused by that. Maybe they meant, and the article doesn't offer any explanation, but maybe what they're saying is don't buy like fad diet books. Don't go in, don't accept like some sort of weird exercise regimen. Don't buy that stuff. Maybe. And then do exercise, don't drink, don't smoke. Yeah. I mean, that's true. Those are good points. That's the best we can do. I did think it was very interesting that there's been this perhaps hoax in the New York Times and other places to try to get us to believe there are certain spots on Earth where people live particularly longer than everywhere else. When the real answer is, again, you have a society where everyone has decent health care, everyone has enough. We don't promote alcohol, we don't promote tobacco. We have exercise as a regular part of our lives. That's not the narrative that corporate elites want from you. They don't want you. They want, you want to exercise, you pay for it. We don't have walkable communities. You have a gym that you have to pay a membership for. You have to buy expensive elliptical. Maybe that's what they're saying. Don't buy elliptical machines for your home. I don't know. The answers to our problems aren't complicated. They're not hard to understand. What they are is hard to implement because despite the popularity of peace, Medicare for all, of a higher taxes on the wealthy, of a jobs program, despite the fact that all of those are really popular, they're not popular among the people who run the Democratic Party. They're even less popular among many of the people who run the Republican Party. That's why we don't get them. That's why we need to move very different direction. 2025 has to be the year of organizing for emerging and alternative parties. I will see you tomorrow on the Free For All.